All right, fashion lovers, let's take a trip back in time. The 70s and 80s were wild, bold, and totally iconic, especially when it came to teenage fashion. From groovy bell-bottoms and tie-dye shirts to neon leg warmers and oversized blazers, these decades had style. Today, we're diving into the trends that defined teen fashion back then, the must-have outfits, the biggest fashion influences, and even some trends that are making a comeback today. So sit back, relax, and let's rewind to the stylish past. Teen fashion in the 1970s. The 1970s were an explosion of individuality, rebellion, and cultural shifts, and nothing reflected that more than what teenagers were wearing. This wasn't just a decade of random fashion trends. It was a time when what you wore actually meant something. Clothes weren't just about looking good. They were political statements, reflections of personal values, and symbols of where you fit in or didn't fit in within society. And because of that, fashion in the 70s wasn't just one single style. It was a mix of so many different influences, each shaping a unique identity for the teens of that era. At the beginning of the decade, the hippie movement was still alive and well. Though it had started in the 1960s, the remnants of peace, love, and free-spirited dressing carried on. And it was all about rejecting mainstream fashion in favor of something more natural, more relaxed, and less structured. This is where you saw those effortlessly flowing peasant blouses that made it look like you had just walked out of a countryside meadow. Maxi skirts were another staple, often made from patchwork fabrics or featuring intricate embroidery that gave them an earthy, handmade feel. A lot of these clothes weren't even bought in stores. DIY culture was huge, and many teens took to sewing their own garments or adding their own personal touches to them. Embroidered flowers on a denim jacket? That was a teenage rite of passage. Tie-dye was another essential, and every self-respecting teen had at least one homemade tie-dye shirt in their closet. The beauty of tie-dye was that no two shirts ever looked the same. You could mix whatever colors you wanted, twist and fold the fabric however you pleased, and come out with a completely unique design that screamed, "I don't follow the rules." Bell-bottom jeans were the holy grail of teenage fashion at the time. Everyone, absolutely everyone, wore them. The tighter they were around the thighs and the more dramatically they flared at the bottom, the better. And the variety was endless. Some were simple and classic, while others were wild, covered in patches, embroidery, or hand-painted designs that made them feel like a canvas for self-expression. It was impossible to walk down the street without seeing flared denim swinging with every step, turning an ordinary sidewalk into an unofficial fashion show. These jeans weren't just pants, they were a lifestyle. They were paired with anything and everything. Crop tops, oversized sweaters, band t-shirts, fringed vests, you name it. But as the mid-70s rolled in, the free-spirited, flowy aesthetic of hippie fashion began to be replaced with something much flashier, much more in your face: disco fashion. The disco era was all about dressing like you were the main character in a Saturday Night Fever dream, even if you were just going to the grocery store. Everything had to be bold, shiny, and dramatic. Fabrics shimmered under the lights, and suddenly, polyester became the hottest thing to wear. There was an obsession with tight-fitting clothing that emphasized the body, which is why jumpsuits became such a staple. These weren't just your ordinary one-pieces. They were sleek, form-fitting, and usually made out of some sort of metallic or satin material that reflected light on the dance floor. The colors were vibrant: deep purples, electric blues, golds, and silvers that made it impossible to go unnoticed. And if you were really about that disco life, your jumpsuit had an exaggerated collar, a plunging neckline, or cutout sections that revealed just enough skin to keep things interesting. And then there were the platform shoes. If you weren't teetering at least 3 inches above ground level, were you even trying? Platform shoes were everywhere, and they were not for the faint of heart. They came in every color, every pattern, and were worn by both men and women without a second thought. Some were simple with a solid colored sole, while others had intricate designs, glitter, rainbow patterns, even goldfish swimming inside the heels. Yes, that was a real thing. Walking in them was a challenge, but worth it because they made every outfit instantly cooler. Of course, not every teen was into the over-the-top disco look, and many preferred something more casual, something that didn't require balancing on platform shoes the size of bricks. The everyday teenage fashion of the 70s had its own vibe, something effortlessly stylish yet laid back. High-waisted flared jeans were still a staple, but they were often paired with graphic t-shirts that featured slogans, logos, and cultural references. Band t-shirts were huge, and if you were a fan of Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, or Pink Floyd, you made sure everyone knew it by wearing their merch like a badge of honor. T-shirts with funny slogans or quirky designs were also popular, often featuring playful, sarcastic messages. And then, of course, denim was king. Denim jackets, denim skirts, denim everything. There was something about a well-worn denim jacket covered in patches that just screamed cool. You didn't need to try too hard. Throw it over a simple t-shirt and boom, but you looked effortlessly stylish. But what's an outfit without accessories? The 1970s were all about statement accessories that tied the whole look together. Headbands were a must-have, worn across the forehead to give off that effortlessly bohemian, I might be on my way to a music festival look. Sunglasses weren't just about blocking the sun, they were about making a statement. The lenses were tinted in warm colors, rose, amber, blue, and they came in oversized frames that made everyone look like a rock star. And then there were macrame bags, hand-woven and handmade, perfect for carrying around all the essentials, which for a 70s teen probably included a pack of gum, a mixtape, and a note from a friend folded into a ridiculously complicated shape. Jewelry was chunky and unapologetic. Big hoop earrings, stacks of bangles, layered necklaces. But where did all these trends come from? Who were the style icons that teens were looking up to? If you were a teenage girl in the 70s, there was one universal beauty standard: Farrah Fawcett. The moment she hit the scene, her feathered hair became the ultimate goal. It wasn't just a hairstyle, it was the hairstyle. Every girl wanted that effortlessly voluminous, windswept look, and many spent hours trying to perfect it with curling irons, rollers, and an almost ridiculous amount of hairspray. That hair was practically a rite of passage, a symbol of effortless beauty that somehow required a ton of effort. Whether you were heading to school, the mall, or a night out, getting your hair to have that perfect Farrah bounce was top priority. But not every girl wanted the all-American beauty aesthetic. For those who craved something a little more mysterious, a little more bohemian, there was Stevie Nicks. With her flowing fabrics, lace, and layers of jewelry, she brought an effortless, witchy rocker vibe that felt rebellious yet feminine. She wasn't just a fashion icon, she was a mood, an entire aesthetic before the word even became a thing. Girls who followed her style weren't just dressing up, they were embracing an energy, a way of life. The loose, draped silhouettes and earthy tones made it feel like you were floating through life in a dreamy, mystical haze. And let's not forget that music and fashion were inseparable. Farrah's look aligned perfectly with the sunny, feel-good pop culture of the time, while Stevie's boho style went hand in hand with the rise of folk rock and the deep, poetic lyrics that defined the era. For teenage boys, David Bowie was more than just a musician. He was a revelation, a force of nature that shook the very foundation of what it meant to be stylish, confident, and completely unbothered by society's rigid expectations. In an era where traditional masculinity was still the norm, Bowie walked onto the scene like he had fallen straight from a futuristic, glitter-covered planet and decided to rewrite the rules of fashion himself. His bold, androgynous style didn't just challenge norms, it blew them to pieces. Bowie wasn't afraid to embrace the theatrical side of fashion, and in doing so, he gave teenage boys permission to do the same. He wore boldly patterned jumpsuits that looked like they belonged to a space-age rock god, sky-high platform boots that made him look even more untouchable, and flowing capes that would put any superhero to shame. And the makeup? That was a whole revolution on its own. His signature lightning bolt face paint, sparkling eyeshadows, and razor-sharp eyeliner weren't just accessories, they were statements. Declarations that self-expression had no gender, no limits, no boundaries. If you were a teenage boy who didn't quite fit into the traditional mold, Bowie wasn't just an artist. He was proof that it was okay to be different, to be loud, to be seen. He embodied the idea that masculinity wasn't just one thing, that fashion wasn't about blending in, and that the most powerful thing you could wear was confidence. Meanwhile, on the opposite end of the spectrum, John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever was delivering a different kind of fashion moment, one that was equally influential, but in a completely different way. If Bowie represented the rebellious, eccentric, boundary-breaking side of 70s Ashen, Travolta represented the epitome of disco cool. His crisp, white three-piece suit, complete with a jacket so sharp it could cut glass, a vest that hugged his torso perfectly, and high-waisted trousers that flared just the right amount, became the ultimate symbol of disco swagger. The moment he strutted onto the dance floor, striking that now iconic pose with one arm in the air, every teenage boy watching knew this was how you dressed if you wanted to be the king of the night. The white suit wasn't just clothing, it was a status symbol. It was sleek, stylish, and exuded effortless confidence. Paired with a silky button-down shirt, usually unbuttoned halfway because of course, gold chains glinting under the club lights, and glossy, slicked-back hair, the disco look was tailor-made for anyone who wanted to stand out. The influence of celebrities, music, and movies was huge. Back then, there was no internet, no Instagram influencers telling people what to wear. Trends were shaped by what people saw on TV, in magazines, or in music videos. If a musician wore something bold on stage, teens wanted to copy it. If a character in a movie rocked a certain outfit, you could bet that look would be in stores the next week. By the time the decade came to an end, fashion had transformed once again, slowly shifting toward the more structured, preppy look of the 1980s. But the impact of 70s teen fashion never really faded. Even today, we see bell-bottoms making comebacks, platform shoes returning, and boho chic styles still dominating summer fashion. The 1970s were a decade decade of freedom, self-expression, and fearless style, and that influence can still be felt in the way people dress today. So next time you throw on a pair of flared jeans or oversized sunglasses, just remember, the 70s never really left. The 70s were all about free-spirited, laid-back style, but as the 80s rolled in, fashion got bolder, brighter, and way more dramatic. What teens looked like in the 1980s. Teen fashion in the 1980s was an explosion of color, personality, and excess. If the previous decades were about breaking rules, the 80s were about rewriting them entirely. Every outfit had to make a statement. And for teenagers, fashion wasn't just about clothing. It was a way to express their identity, their favorite music, and their place in the world. There was no such thing as too much. If an outfit could be brighter, bigger, or bolder, it absolutely was. The decade was all about standing out, whether that meant looking like a rebellious rock star, a polished, preppy school kid, or someone who just walked out of an aerobics class even if they had no plans to exercise. The variety in teen fashion during this era was unmatched. The 80s were all about subcultures, and each one had its own unique style. Some teenagers wanted to look sophisticated, so they embraced the preppy aesthetic, dressing as if they were heading to a private school in the Upper East Side of New York, even if they were just going to the mall with their friends. Others had no interest in looking polished and instead leaned into punk and rock-inspired fashion, which was all about rebellion, attitude, and a complete disregard for traditional style rules. Then, of course, there was the fitness craze, which took over pop culture so intensely that suddenly, wearing neon workout gear and oversized sweatshirts became everyday fashion. Whether or not someone had ever done an aerobics class didn't matter. What mattered was that they looked like they did. At the heart of 80s teen fashion was the idea that more was always better. Every trend was dramatic. Every outfit was accessorized to the max, and there was no such thing as looking too extra. Hair was teased sky high, colors clashed on purpose, and fabrics were metallic, shiny, or completely outrageous. If someone walked into a room, their outfit needed to grab attention immediately, and if it didn't, well then they just weren't doing it right. For teenagers who wanted to look wealthy, polished, and effortlessly put together, the preppy look was the way to go. This style was heavily influenced by classic American brands like Ralph Lauren, Lacoste, and Tommy Hilfiger, which promoted a clean, upscale aesthetic that made teens look like they spent their weekends playing tennis at a country club. Boys wore pastel-colored button-up shirts, neatly tucked into khakis or high-waisted trousers, often paired with a belt and polished loafers. Blazers were a must, and layering sweaters over the shoulders became a defining look of the decade. Girls embraced pleated skirts, plaid blazers, and knee-high socks, completing their outfits with simple headbands or pearl necklaces that added an air of sophistication. But not every teenager had the budget to shop at high-end brands, so many found creative ways to DIY their own preppy aesthetic. Thrift shopping became popular among those who wanted to achieve the look without spending a fortune, and many teens raided their parents' closets for old blazers, polo shirts, and accessories that fit the style. Since the preppy look was all about looking polished, even budget-friendly outfits could pass as high-end if styled the right way. This style wasn't just about the clothes. It was about presenting an image of success, confidence, and class, even if, in reality, someone was just an average high school student trying to pass their math class. While some teenagers wanted to look like they were about to attend a fancy brunch with their parents, others wanted the complete opposite. The punk and rocker aesthetic was all about rebelling against mainstream fashion and embracing a look that was edgy, raw, and full of attitude. Inspired by bands like the Ramones, the Clash, and Sex Pistols, this fashion movement encouraged teens to tear up their clothes, spike their hair, and wear as much black as humanly possible. Leather jackets became an absolute staple, and the more studded, ripped, and worn out they looked, the better. Jeans weren't just ripped, they were practically shredded, often held together with safety pins, chains, or patches that gave them a customized DIY feel. Hair was a huge part of the punk and rocker aesthetic, and teenagers went to extreme lengths to make sure theirs stood out. Brightly dyed hair became a symbol of rebellion, with neon blues, greens, purples, and reds making frequent appearances. Some teens took it even further by styling their hair into tall, gravity-defying mohawks, which required so much hairspray it could probably survive a hurricane. Makeup was another essential part of the look, and both girls and guys experimented with heavy black eyeliner, dark lipstick, and smudged eyeshadow to complete the grungy, tough appearance. Music played a massive role in shaping teen fashion, and no one had a bigger influence than Madonna. She completely revolutionized the way teenage girls dressed, proving that fashion was meant to be fun, layered, and completely fearless. Suddenly, lace wasn't just for fancy occasions. It was layered over tank tops and worn with ripped tights and chunky jewelry. Fingerless gloves, oversized earrings, and messy, teased hair became defining elements of Madonna-inspired fashion, and her music videos served as a style guide for an entire generation of girls who wanted to copy her rebellious, yet effortlessly cool look. While Madonna was shaping the way way teenage girls dressed, Michael Jackson was doing the same for teenage boys. His iconic red leather jacket, made famous in the Thriller music video, became one of the most sought-after fashion items of the decade. If a teen wanted to instantly look cool, all they had to do was throw on a similar jacket, wear a single sequined glove, and maybe attempt a moonwalk or two. Michael Jackson's influence went far beyond clothing. He shaped the way teens saw fashion as a form of performance, something that could be just as exciting as the music itself. Beyond the rebellious punk look and the polished, preppy aesthetic, there was another major fashion trend that completely took over the 80s, the athleisure and workout craze. Thanks to the rise of aerobics, workout videos, and celebrity fitness culture, suddenly, teenagers everywhere were dressing like they were constantly on their way to a dance studio. Leg warmers, neon spandex, oversized sweatshirts, and headbands became everyday fashion staples, regardless of whether or not someone actually planned to exercise. This was also the era of the windbreaker, a lightweight jacket that was usually covered in bold, clashing colors that somehow still looked cool. The obsession with fitness wasn't just about looking good, it was about looking active, like someone was constantly in motion and ready to break into a workout at any given moment. Sneakers became an essential part of teen fashion, with brands like Nike and Adidas dominating the market. White high-top sneakers were especially popular, and some teens even went as far as matching their shoelaces to their outfits for a fully coordinated look. Accessories played a huge role in defining 80s teen fashion, and there was no such thing as too many. If someone had big hair, oversized earrings, and multiple layers of necklaces, they were doing it right. Scrunchies weren't just a way to tie back hair, they were a full-on fashion statement, often worn around the wrist as an accessory, even when they weren't in use. Fanny packs were another iconic trend, worn across the waist like a belt bag, proving that fashion in the 80s was just as much about convenience as it was about style. At the end of the day, 80s teen fashion was all about fearlessness. There were no rules, no restrictions, and no concept of too much. Whether a teenager wanted to look like a high-fashion prep school student, a punk rock star, or an aerobics instructor from a workout video, they had the freedom to experiment and express themselves in ways that no other decade had embraced quite as boldly. Looking back, some of the fashion choices may seem a little over the top, but that was exactly the point. The 80s were loud, wild, and unforgettable, and so was the fashion. The bold, high-energy fashion of the 80s brought a whole new vibe, but it didn't erase the influence of the 70s. Instead, some trends evolved, while others faded away. So, how did these two decades truly differ? Comparing the decades. The 1970s and 1980s were two completely different worlds when it came to fashion. The 70s were all about freedom, self-expression, and a kind of laid-back, effortless cool. People were experimenting, borrowing styles from different cultures, and embracing a more natural, carefree aesthetic. Think flowing peasant tops, earthy tones, and bell-bottoms that swished with every step. Fashion felt personal, and the idea was to wear things that made you feel good, whether it was a fringed vest or a handmade macrame bag. Then came the 80s, kicking down the door with a whole new attitude. If the 70s were about ease and expression, the 80s were about boldness, excess, and making a statement, loudly. Clothes got tighter, brighter, and bigger, especially the hair. It was the era of power dressing, neon spandex, and looking like you just stepped out of an MTV music video. The contrast between these decades could not have been more dramatic. One of the biggest shifts from the 70s to the 80s was how fashion moved from loose and flowy to structured and fitted. In the 70s, jeans were flared, pants were high-waisted, and fabrics were soft and breathable. People gravitated toward natural materials like cotton, linen, and suede, creating outfits that felt effortless. But in the 80s, everything tightened up. Skinny jeans and leggings took over, and synthetic fabrics like polyester, spandex, and vinyl were everywhere. Clothes became sleek, shiny, and synthetic, reflecting the futuristic, tech-driven energy of the decade. Another major change? The colors and patterns. The 70s had a warm, earthy color palette. Lots of browns, oranges, mustard yellows, and muted greens. Patterns were often psychedelic or bohemian, featuring florals, tie-dye, or intricate embroidery. Fast forward to the 80s, and it was like someone turned up the saturation dial to max brightness. Neon pinks, electric blues, and highlighter greens took over, often clashing in the most chaotic way possible. Prints went from soft and artistic to bold and geometric. Zebra stripes, polka dots, checkerboard patterns, anything that could grab attention. The way teens dressed casually completely transformed between the two decades. In the 70s, casual style was inspired by the hippie movement. A lot of denim-on-denim, slouchy cardigans, band t-shirts, and platform sandals. It was all about looking cool without trying too hard. By the 80s, casual wear took on a preppy, polished look. Teens traded their bell-bottoms for straight-legged jeans, swapped their peasant blouses for polo shirts, and added structured blazers or sweaters tied around their shoulders. The preppy aesthetic, made famous by brands like Ralph Lauren and Lacoste, became the go-to style for a polished, clean-cut image. Music always influences fashion, and the 70s were dominated by hippie culture and disco fever. The 70s were all about free-spirited fashion, whether it was long, flowy maxi dresses or high-waisted jeans paired with a simple tank top. But in the 80s, punk and rock took over. Inspired by bands like the Ramones, The Clash, and later Guns N' Roses, teens traded in their flowy outfits for ripped jeans, studded jackets, and leather everything. The rebellious attitude of punk fashion was a sharp contrast to the soft, bohemian feel of the 70s. Disco fashion, which had dominated the late 70s with flashy fabrics and glamorous jumpsuits, evolved into 80s party wear. Sequins, metallics, and shimmer stuck around, but they were now paired with bold silhouettes, sharp shoulders, and dramatic angular cuts. The 80s took the glitz of disco and turned it up to 11, bigger, shinier, and much, much louder. The 70s did have a sporty influence, with short athletic shorts, knee-high socks, and striped tracksuits making an appearance. But exercise was not necessarily a fashion statement. It was just something people did. Then the 80s came along and made fitness a whole lifestyle. Suddenly, everyone wanted to look like they were on their way to an aerobics class. Leg warmers, spandex bodysuits, oversized sweatshirts, and neon workout gear became a staple, even for people who were not actually working out. The athleisure movement had arrived, and it was all about looking sporty and energetic, even if you were just grabbing lunch. 70s accessories were laid back and earthy. Think macrame bags, beaded jewelry, tinted aviator sunglasses, and floppy hats. Everything had a bit of a handmade, artisanal feel, matching the natural aesthetic of the decade. In the 80s, accessories went in the exact opposite direction. Bigger, bolder, and flashier. Chunky jewelry, giant hoop earrings, layered pearl necklaces, and belts with massive buckles became everyday fashion statements. Headbands, scrunchies, and fingerless gloves, thanks to Madonna, were absolute must-haves. If the 70s were about effortless cool, the 80s were about over-the-top glamour. The 70s had its fashion icons: Farrah Fawcett's feathered hair, David Bowie's gender-bending glam rock looks, and John Travolta's Saturday Night Fever suit. But the 80s took celebrity influence to a whole new level. Thanks to MTV, music videos became a massive part of pop culture. And whatever Madonna, Michael Jackson, or Prince wore instantly became a trend. Teens rushed to copy Madonna's lace gloves, Jackson's red leather jacket, or Prince's ruffled shirts. Television also played a huge role, with shows like Saved by the Bell and Dynasty influencing both casual and high-end fashion trends. Comparing 70s and 80s fashion is like comparing day and night. The 70s were all about comfort, ease, and natural self-expression, while the 80s were about bold, structured, and attention-grabbing fashion. The transition between these two decades was a complete shift in attitude, going from free-spirited bohemian vibes to high-energy, power-dressing confidence. While some trends carried over, like disco's love for shimmer and workout gear becoming mainstream, most styles did a 180, reflecting the changing moods of each era. While the 70s and 80s had their own distinct styles, fashion is never really stuck in one era. Trends come and go, but some looks from these decades have made a major comeback in today's style. Legacy and comebacks. Fashion has this funny way of creeping back into our lives, doesn't it? One minute, we're laughing at old pictures of our parents in their bell-bottom jeans and oversized blazers, and the next, we're rushing to the store to get the exact same look. Trends never really die. They just take a little break before making a grand return. And when they do come back, they always arrive with a modern twist. The influence of 70s and 80s fashion is everywhere today. Whether it's flared jeans taking over runways, crop tops dominating summer outfits, or vintage sneakers becoming an everyday staple, it's like someone hit rewind on the style timeline. But instead of just replaying the past, we're remixing it with today's aesthetics. Take flared jeans, for example. If you were around in the early 2000s, you probably remember a time when anything that wasn't skinny jeans was considered a fashion crime. If your jeans didn't cling to your legs like a second skin, people would look at you funny. But now, flared jeans are back in full force, and honestly, it's about time. There's something effortlessly cool about the way they flow with every step, adding movement and personality to an outfit. In the 70s, these pants were a symbol of rebellion, worn by rock stars, hippies, and basically anyone who wanted to make a statement. Today, they still carry that free-spirited vibe, but with a modern edge. Instead of pairing them with tie-dye shirts and fringe vests, people are styling them with sleek crop tops, oversized blazers, and trendy sneakers. It's the same silhouette, just upgraded for today's aesthetic. And let's be real, after squeezing into skinny jeans for over a decade, this looser, more breathable fit is a welcome change. And speaking of crop tops, has there ever been a more persistent trend? It's like they refuse refused to go out of style. They were huge in the 80s, when pop stars and fitness icons wore them with high-waisted leggings and leg warmers, fully embracing the workout craze. Fast forward to today, and crop tops are still everywhere, but with even more variety. Now you can find them in every shape and fabric. Casual cotton tanks, sophisticated silk blouses, chunky knit sweaters with cropped hems. What's funny is that the way people are wearing them hasn't changed much. High-waisted bottoms are still the go-to pairing, just like they were back in the day. The difference is that now, instead of pairing crop tops with shiny spandex or neon windbreakers, we're going for more muted, minimalistic styles. It's the perfect example of how fashion reinvents itself, keeping the core of a trend but adapting it to modern tastes. And let's not forget the shoes. If you look down at your feet right now, there's a good chance you're wearing a sneaker style that first gained popularity decades ago. Retro sneakers have completely taken over, and brands are cashing in on the nostalgia. Adidas, Nike, and Converse have all re-released their classic designs from the 70s and 80s, and sneakerheads can't get enough. The chunky soles, the vintage colorways, the slightly worn-in aesthetic. It all taps into this love for the past that today's fashion seems obsessed with. But what's really interesting is how sneakers have become so versatile. Back in the day, they were strictly casual, something you'd wear with jeans and a t-shirt. Now, people are rocking them with suits, dresses, even red carpet looks. The line between formal and casual has blurred, and retro sneakers have become a key part of that shift. What's really fascinating about all these comebacks is how they prove that fashion is never really new. Every new trend we see today is just a reinvention of something that came before. But the reason these styles are making a return isn't just because designers ran out of ideas. It's because nostalgia is powerful. There's something comforting about revisiting the past, especially when it comes to fashion. When people see flared jeans, crop tops, or vintage sneakers, they don't just see clothing. They see memories. Maybe they remember their parents wearing those styles, or they associate them with a favorite movie from the past. Fashion isn't just about clothes. It's about feeling connected to a time, a mood, an era. And of course, celebrities and influencers have played a massive role in bringing these retro trends back into the spotlight. It's one thing to see a trend on the runway, but it's another to see your favorite artist or social media star rocking it in their everyday life. When a celebrity wears a vintage-inspired outfit, it instantly makes it feel fresh and desirable again. Think about how Hailey Bieber has been bringing back 90s minimalism, or how Harry Styles channels 70s glam rock with his wardrobe. These fashion throwbacks don't just happen randomly. There's a whole cultural machine behind them, making sure they resurface at just the right time. The 70s and 80s were two of the most influential fashion decades in history, and their impact is still visible today. From high-waisted flares to oversized blazers, from workout-inspired athleisure to bold statement sneakers, these trends aren't just making a comeback, they're evolving. The beauty of fashion is that it's never stagnant. It takes from the past, reinvents it, and creates something that feels both nostalgic and new at the same time. And honestly, that's what makes it so exciting. Who knows? In another 10 or 20 years, we might be laughing at today's styles, only to find ourselves wearing them all over again. Teen fashion from the 70s and 80s wasn't just about clothes. It was a statement, a reflection of the culture, music, and attitude of the time. The 70s embraced a free-spirited, effortless style, while the 80s cranked up the volume with bold colors and daring trends. And even decades later, their influence is still everywhere, proving that great fashion never truly fades. But now, we want to hear from you. Which decade's fashion do you love more? Are you all about the groovy flares and fringe, or do you prefer the neon and shoulder pads? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And of course, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. See you in the next one.